Yes, we could continue praising the whole day if that is what praising is about. There we had Nyasha Ngoloma and Alice Kimanzi and Flora Weru doing what they know best, worshiping the Lord and praising Him in the best way possible. And I hope you have been dancing because I have too. And I am enjoying myself. Today we are exalting the Lord. We are honoring our God. We are glorifying Him and giving Him all the praises because He is worthy of it all. It all. Hakuna kitu tunabakisha, and we are not praising ourselves. No, we are putting that aside. We are not praising our jobs on the side. We are not praising our marriages, our family. Today, we are exalting the Lord. And yes, there are consequences that come with lifting any other thing above God. Alright? Because He is the God of everything. He is the God of all things. Sasa, unaweka aje anything above our God? And yes, we have so many circumstances in life that make us want to feel proud of ourselves, which is not a bad thing. Of course, if you have done something good, tap your shoulder and tell yourself, good job, Blashi, tunasonga. But never let anything that has been given to you by the Lord take away your focus from Him, so that you end up praising yourself or anything that He has given you more than Him. Sawa sawa. So welcome back to today's show, and thank you so much to everybody that is sending your comments. Nawaona pia kwa WhatsApp, asanteni sana, and also on Facebook we'll get to read your comments. But right now I would like us to focus on what happens if we do not exalt the Lord. And of course, there are ways that we worship our God. There are ways that we exalt Him. Sometimes we do it through the singing that we have had right now, through clapping, dancing, singing, and all that. There are so many ways. If you are able to play an instrument, that is also a way of exalting God, making sure that you take time to practice and do it right and get it right, so that you produce such good music as we had. And of course, before Nyasha, we had Jemedari wa Vita by Henrik Mruma, and that in itself is a way of recognizing that He is the Lord of hosts. He is the one who goes before us. He's the one who fights our battles for us, and therefore we should not fear. You see, every time you revere God, or if you worship Him, if you focus on Him, then everything else will be in line, will be smooth for you. So you will not have to worry or fear about tomorrow or what you're going to do next or the next level, because He has already gone before you. Sawa sawa. For now, let's go to the Bible and read this story of this powerful king known as King Nebuchadnezzar. It's found in the book of Daniel, and this is one of my favorite characters in the Bible. Daniel, a man who walked with God under every circumstance. Like, hakuna kitu kilikuwa kinamtisha. He knew his God, and he knew that God would not leave him. I take you back to a time when the children of Israel had been captured by the Babylonian Empire. And at this point, the Lord Himself had made that happen as a punishment. Excuse me, because the children of Israel had sinned against Him. And so He made sure that this time they were defeated and taken captive into slavery into the Babylonian Empire. And at that time, the king that was ruling, his name was King Nebuchadnezzar, this mighty king that was feared all over the earth. Now, one thing I'd like you to remember is that all authority on earth is given from heaven. Whoever is holding any position of power or position of authority, that person has been placed there under the powers of heaven, or under the authority of heaven. Like Mungu aliona sawa, huyo ni wakati wake wa kuwa kwa hiyo position. Alright? So this king, as evil as you might think he was, or as great as you might think he was given that position by God Himself. And with that, he was feared all over the earth. Everybody knew that he was majestic. He was a great king. And there was honor all around the world. Walikuwa wanajua kuna King Nebuchadnezzar, and of course he had grown his empire to in such great ways that other kingdoms would only look up to the kingdom of Babylon. Sawa sawa. And so the children of Israel were brought here, and at this point we have 4 characters that we already know. Kuna Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These guys were known to have worshipped the Lord their God even in this new land that they were in. Now the Babylonians knew nothing or did not know anything about God. They were idol worshippers, all right? And King Nebuchadnezzar pia alikuwa na worship idols, and sometimes he would be worshipped. He would make this majestic idol to be worshipped and make sure that everybody worships it because he had the power to do it, all right? And so the first chapter, we have them getting into captivity, and of course there are the armies that are being selected. The young men were being fed. There was this commander, his name was Ariok. Aliambiwa hao watu wakula vizuri, after a certain time, a certain period, I will have them brought to me so that tuone ni akina nani watajoin our army. And so there's Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Wenye walisema hatuta defile our bodies with the meat from the king's table. Wafanya hivi, tupe 2 vegetables, and they ate vegetables. And after the time that they had given Ariok, the commander, akakuja akawaona, and indeed they gained favor. They were 10 times better than those that were eating the meat and all other good food that the king provided. And of course we are told their wisdom was 10 times more than those that they were with. And all this can only be attributed to God himself. He is the one who made all this happen. Now we get to chapter 3, where chapter 2, where King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and it was a bad dream. It troubled him, and he decided to call all his magicians, diviners, sorcerers, all those wise men in his kingdom to tell him what his dream was, and to tell him what the interpretation of the dream was. And of course, nobody in the world would know. Ulilala ukaota nini? Surely. And of course, because he was the king he decided, hamtaniambia what I dreamt. All the wise men in this land waende wauawe. And the decree was made. And of course, Kina Daniel, our friend, was among the wise men. He was already known to be a wise man. And the story continues where we are told that Daniel asked the king to give them time. He went into prayer, and the Lord revealed to him about the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had dreamt with and what that whole dream meant. Make sure that you read Daniel chapter 2. And of course, after he had explained and interpreted, King Nebuchadnezzar himself said, indeed, your God is to be worshipped. Mungu wa kina Daniel, make sure yeye ndiye anakuwa worshipped in this land, all right? Let nobody stop you from worshiping your God. And then we get to chapter 3, where he makes this golden statue and says kila mtu is supposed to worship that statue, all right? At the sound of lyre, whatnot, kukipigwa hiyo music, make sure that everybody bows down to that statue. And of course, our brethren, Kina Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego wakasema, there is no way, we are not going to do that. And they did not worship the statue. And what was the punishment? To be thrown into the furnace of fire. And it was to be made 7 times hotter. It was so hot so that those people who threw them into the fire, walichomeka wakakufa. Like the heat burned them to the point of death. And when these guys were in there, they were seen walking around with a 4th man in the fire. And the king was like, atukurusha watu watatu huko ndani? So who's the 4th man walking with them? And so after some time he called them forth, and they came, and not even a hair of their head was burned. And again King Nebuchadnezzar was like, your God is to be worshipped. Amazing. It was amazing in his sight, and everybody there was amazed. That's chapter 3. But then we get to chapter 4, where we now see King Nebuchadnezzar, even after being told the interpretation of dreams by Daniel, and how there would be other kingdoms coming and being destroyed, and God himself being the one who reigns and all that. What happened in chapter 4 is quite interesting, because at this point now, hakukuwa na idols, hakukuwa na those things to be worshipped. No. King Nebuchadnezzar himself was the one who was praising himself. All right? Let's see how that happened. In chapter 4, King Nebuchadnezzar, verse 1, to the nations and the peoples of every language who live in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs! How mighty his wonders! His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion endures from generation to generation. Verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at home in my palace, contented and prosperous. I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was lying in bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. So I commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. When the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners came, I told them the dream, but they could not interpret it for me. Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream. He is also called Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. So King Daniel had been given names of that land, the Babylonian land, and Daniel was named Belteshazzar, all right, as one of the gods of King Nebuchadnezzar, because they believed that the holy God was in him. And he said, or verse 9, I said, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Here is my dream. Interpret it for me. Verse 10. These are the visions I saw while lying in bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it the wild animals found shelter, and the birds lived in its branches. From it every creature was fed. In the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass by for him. Now, scholars call this 7 times, or they translate it as 7 years. So verse 17, the decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and gives them to anyone who wishes, and sets over them the lowliest of people. This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now, Belteshazzar, tell me what it means, for none of these wise men in the kingdom can interpret it for me, but you can, because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Now, note that Nebuchadnezzar is receiving dreams from heaven above. And these dreams can only be interpreted by one who is connected to these heavens, because we have seen him calling the enchanters, the sorcerers, the diviners, the magicians to come and explain his dream, but none of them are able to do it with their own powers or knowledge or whatever other gods they had in their kingdom. But they knew of Daniel, who had given a dream and an interpretation without the king explaining to him. And so Nebuchadnezzar knew, Belteshazzar, yule Daniel anaweza kuja and give me an explanation of this whole dream. Now, also note that every dream that is given to Nebuchadnezzar is not happening at the present. It is something that is to happen in future. So with Daniel explaining whatever the dreams meant, it was bound to prepare Nebuchadnezzar for what was to come. Sawa sawa. And so in verse 19, Daniel interprets the dream. So then Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. So the king said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you. Belteshazzar answered, and having nesting places in its branches for the birds. Your Majesty, you are that tree. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to distant parts of the earth. Of course, he was known all over the earth. So that tree that was so huge and beautiful with all these leaves, providing every creature with whatever it needed to be fed with, that was King Nebuchadnezzar. So, Your Majesty, you saw a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven and saying, cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump bound with iron and bronze in the grass of the field while its roots remained in the ground. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the wild animals until 7 times pass by for him. Now this is the interpretation, Your Majesty, and this is the decree of the Most High, or what the Most High has issued against my lord the king. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes. Sawa sawa. Kindly note that point. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives these kingdoms of the earth to anyone he wishes. Sawa sawa. So it is the Lord who decides who is to take over what nation or what kingdom. Sawa sawa. So that point, when Daniel was explaining that whole dream, he told him, Mpaka, you acknowledge that the Lord is sovereign over everything. Utakula nyasi, my friend. Utakula nyasi. And this happened. As the story continues, make sure that you go and read from verse 26 all the way to verse 37. It actually came to pass 12 months later. 12, like a whole year later, it came to pass. And at this point, verse 28, let's read from verse 28. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, Yani mdomo tu, mdomo, whatever you perceive in your heart, you say it, yeah? Tunakujua based on what you're speaking, all right? So he said, is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty. It was about him, about his majesty, his power, his wisdom, everything. Tukaona mimi ndiye nimemake he. Does that in any way relate to you? Have you ever found yourself saying, kama si mimi, he place, he, hawa watu, hawa sijui nini? Have you ever found yourself in such a position and you forget about God kabisa? You're like, it is all me. It is all me. And we might all be guilty at some point for saying such a thing, all right? So he said all this. So even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and give them to anyone he wishes. Immediately, like hakukuwa na time ya Nebuchadnezzar kujirudia like, nilikuwa nimeambiwa na Daniel. No. Immediately, what has been said about or had been said about him was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven and my sanity was restored. Like immediately he became like a madman and he was taken into the wild where he was eating grass with the ox and other wild animals, and his hair became like the feathers of an eagle and his claws like a bird. I wonder how he looked like, from a king, a very majestic king, to this man. And so after the 7 years was over, his sanity was restored. He looked up to the skies or to the heavens. Then he praised the Most High. The word says, I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand and say to him, what have you done? Nobody can question God. We are all regarded as nothing in front of our God. And at the same time that my sanity was restored, my honor and splendor were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before. So before he had known that God was sovereign, he was great because the Lord had placed him in that position. And he had given him warnings and ways on how to live. But pride got the better of him because with great power comes great pride. All right? And the Lord does not like the proud. He does not like pride at all. He says he humbles those who are proud. Sawa sawa. Verse 37 is, where now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Now, where do you lie? Have you ever found yourself in a Nebuchadnezzar's kind of position? We're going to take a break, and as we go on this break, we are going to listen to Muhoreria wa Makobe by a lady known as Maggie Kui. She will be our guest this coming Sunday so that we get to know her story more. But really, listen to this song and get to understand who our God really is. I'll see you after this.